to have Agenia here with us today. So I'm just going to share a little bit of a bio, but on a personal level, I've gotten to know Agenia from Nicholas Children's Hospital, and she's just amazing. And I'm so glad that we're able to have her here at FIU to share her wisdom with us. But essentially, Dr. Agenia LeDouche is a licensed psychologist at Nicholas Children's Hospital. She received her PhD in school psychology at the University of Florida and completed her internship at Mailman at University of Miami. Her research and practice experiences have been both in schools and in clinical settings, with her work focusing on culturally and linguistically diverse students and their families, immigrant family engagement, school belonging, and ethno-racial identity development in relation to educational and mental health experiences. So with all of that, she's here. She's going to be talking about cultural humility and working with Haitian youth and families. And we really appreciate you being here. So I'll turn it over to Dr. LeDouche.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be speaking with all of you today on cultural humility and working with Haitian youth and families. Just to give a bit of an overview of what I'll be talking about. So I'll share a little bit about my positionality, who I am, why I'm talking about this topic, why it's important to me, and just a little brief overview of cultural humility. I think it's particularly important for me to speak about that as I give this presentation today. I'll give a brief history of Haiti and the Haitian diaspora in the US and also Haitians in Miami, because that's our context. And if you've kind of been working in Miami, I'm sure you've encountered at some point someone who is related to the Haitian culture. So we'll kind of wrap all of that into considerations for working with the Haitian community. Okay. So a little bit more about me and my positionality. Who am I? So this first picture you'll see, I was super young, sometime before the age of 5. I was born in Naples, Florida, in East Naples, actually, so Naples Manor. This is a part of Naples that is really highly populated with so many Haitians and also a large Mexican population as well. So my lens of the world for the first 5 years of my life was like, oh, everyone is Haitian or Mexican. That was kind of my community that I grew up in. I was born in America, but my parents are immigrants from Haiti. So a lot of my upbringing was kind of this dual identity, right, of being American, but also having Haitian cultural traditions, just widespread throughout my lifetime. So I think it's important to mention that in terms of my positionality, because I am by no means, an expert on all things of the Haitian experience. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that in our next slide on cultural humility, but it is important to mention that. The second picture, this is me in Haiti. I was there in college for a family wedding. And I do think that this was really pivotal for me because it was the first time I went to Haiti since I was very, very young. And I was able to see just so much beauty and so much richness of my own culture, especially in the context of growing up in America. Although I was raised in a Haitian household, seeing just so much, and I'm sure you've seen this too, just the negativity that surrounds discourses about Haiti, about just the Haitian experience. So I was very excited. And then this last picture, I actually went to the undergrad at the University of Miami. And this is a picture with the Haitian student organization there. I was involved with that organization in college. And I put this here too, because it was really for me a time that was marked by just such pride in my culture. Moving to Miami, I learned so much more about what it means to be Haitian overall. So I'm excited to share more of that with you. But as I mentioned, I'm speaking through the lens of cultural humility, and I want to discuss this for you all as well. So what is cultural humility? It's a personal lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but also starts with an examination of their own beliefs and their own cultural identities. This is really, really, really important because in the context of culture, whenever we're talking about, a cultural competency kind of presentation, we always want to think about it in this lens. So as I mentioned, I'm Haitian American. I have worked with many Haitian families. I grew up in a Haitian household. My dissertation was on, Haitian immigrant students. And despite all of that, I am my knowledge is partial, right? I don't know everything about the Haitian experience, and that's the case for everyone. So when we approach aspects of culture through this lens of humility, we recognize that I see things with my own biases, with my own perceptions, with my own experience, and it's important, right? So those who share a cultural identity, they might share a similar story, right? There's a lot of similarities I might share with another who is of Haitian descent, but we also have important differences and unique characteristics. And as psychologists, this is so important, so important to recognize. Engaging with clients with this lens, though, it means that you're understanding and honoring your own story and those of your clients, right? So you don't exist in a vacuum whenever you're working with any client, right? You want to recognize their culture, but also yours, because your own culture might impact how you perceive another. So these are all just really important to think about. So I'll give a brief history of Haiti. So some fast facts, Haiti occupies the western third of the island of Hispaniola, so we share the island with the Dominican Republic. The current population is estimated around 11.7 million plus. And in 1804, we were the first country in the world led by former slaves and one of the wealthiest countries in the Caribbean. So many countries actually in South America gained a lot of help and aid from Haiti following our country being that first to lead a successful slave rebellion into our own independence. So and talk to Haitians today, you'll notice there's this pride, there's this resilience that comes from this moment in history. So it's always important to kind of go back to that, right? In 1804, the power that individuals held to be able to gain their independence was huge. You juxtapose that to today, Haiti is currently the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And I could do a whole another presentation on just kind of the history of Haiti overall and kind of what's led to that. But it is important to note, right? So as I mentioned, resilience is really key when you're thinking of the Haitian community, especially in the context of this, right? So constantly feeling like you are part of a culture that has such a negative um, just view from other people, but also has a really difficult history going from the top, right, to feeling like you're at the bottom, but still maintaining resilience. And that is really important, especially from a mental health perspective, right? So that generational trauma, if you will, that might occur. And currently, there's a lot of political instability in Haiti, actually. So the current climate in Haiti is marked by many things, but just speaking from the context of the last few years. So in 2021, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was actually assassinated. Since then, our country has not had a president. So it's really important to think about individuals who are living there or who have come since that are really enduring a lot of trauma from a political standpoint. You can imagine armed gangs are really kind of controlling the majority of the capital city right now. So even from a personal standpoint, right? If I'm calling my cousins and they're talking about like they're just so excited just to get back home because nothing happened to them on their way home, you can imagine how much that does to their mental health and well-being. So particularly thinking about if you're working with Haitian individuals here, that not only may they have gone through some of this instability that I'm describing, but they also might have family members who are on their minds every day. Just something to kind of keep in mind. Currently, there's a shortage of drinking water. There's a huge collapse in the country's health system, and Haitians are just finding it increasingly difficult to afford food amid soaring inflation. So as I mentioned, there's a lot here that you can consider to be baggage, not only for those living there, but those who are related to them, who have a care for the people of the country. But again, as I mentioned, it's always important to highlight the rich culture, the beauty of Haiti. Some of these are actually pictures of where my parents grew up from today. So whether it's the southern part of Haiti in Jacmel or the northern part of Haiti in Okap, there's a lot of beauty and richness and actually safety that exists in the country. But oftentimes what we see is isolated to the capital and surrounding areas in terms of the political instability, the gangs, the riots that occur. And although there's kind of widespread instability in other ways, there's a lot of beauty. And I always think, again, cultural humility, right? We have to look at everything, not just this is, a really negative situation, but also there's a lot of beauty here too. So I just want to talk about a diasporic timeline, if you will, of Haitians in the US, because this is also really important. When we're thinking about how we educate ourselves about a particular culture, we have to think about these diasporic movements over time. Because if I'm talking to my dad who came during the 80s, right, and then I'm talking to a student of mine who came after 2010, although they come from the same country, their experiences might be very different. given what was happening in the context at that time in Haiti. So you kind of have these waves of immigrants who coming to the US. That first kind of wave occurred during the revolutionary period, actually. So between 1791 to 1804. If you remember, I mentioned that in 1804 we gained our independence as a country, but that during that time, a lot of people were actually leaving Haiti. Then in the 1920s, you have this other wave that kind of occurred. So after an assassination, actually, of a president during this time period, the U.S. occupied Haiti, and you see a lot of people kind of leaving during this time as well. Then you move forward into the 1950s. This period was marked by a very brutal dictatorship of François Duvalier. And he kind of took over, became a self-named dictator. And then even when he had a son, his son kind of took over when he passed away. The son was 19. A period from the 50s on through the 80s that are marked by this family. That was very corrupt. So it was really during this time you see a huge political instability and a huge decline in the resources of the country. So a lot of people were coming to the US during that time. And then again, during the 70s and 80s when his son took power, that's actually when my parents came, was in the 80s, 84 and 87 or 8, I think, with my mom. So I'll kind of talk about where these diasporas, moved into the US. But again, so you're thinking about what's happening in their context and then how that relates to how they function in the world, right? Maybe there's a mistrust that they have of people in authority. Maybe there's a fear they have of, just going from place to place because they are wondering what might happen. And all of that leads to a lot of mental stress, if you can imagine. But nonetheless, resilience. And then we have one of the most recent, I say one of the most because I didn't list it here, but I'm going to actually mention another movement that I would say is currently happening. But in 2010, there was a catastrophic earthquake that hit Haiti. And after that, we saw a huge diaspora of individuals coming from that time to the US, a lot actually to our area in Miami. We see the impacts of that today, even in 2024. So what happened is that after 2010, many individuals were moving from Haiti, and they first went south, actually into Brazil. So you have a lot of Haitians who went into Brazil, settled there for some time, and then even went down to Chile. So I say all this, it's really interesting. I worked with a lot of Haitian recent immigrants who actually Creole was not their first language. It was Portuguese or it was Spanish. That's another thing to consider from a cultural standpoint, right? So a lot of these individuals who came after 2010, their experience is marked by living in different places in their journey to get to America. So many were in Brazil, many in Chile. A lot of them made this very brutal kind of migration up, then through South America, going through Colombia, going through a lot of hardship. I worked with many patients who would describe to me, watching their family members die in front of them and float away down a river as they're trying to cross it, and making this experience. So again, I mean, I don't even have to speak to what you can imagine, the mental trauma and experience of these individuals, especially after experiencing a catastrophic earthquake where many individuals lost their families right in front of them. So we see this movement that has taken sometimes over 10 years actually to this point of people still coming to America following this earthquake. And even this year in 2024, the Biden administration actually granted a process for parole for individuals from Haiti to come on a visa for 2 years to work, given the political climate that has just made such a huge dearth in resources for Haitians at that time. So lots of different movements. Really important if you're working with an individual from Haiti to ask about when they came here, if they are an immigrant, because you'll learn a lot about the kinds of things that might be in their minds as you're working with them. So this geographical context of Haitians in the US, you'll notice we are very hot with Haitians down here, lots and lots of Haitians in South Florida, in that Tri-County area. We also have a lot in New York and Boston, but other areas as well in the Philly area, Chicago, Louisiana as well, again, marked by these movements. But the diaspora really accounts for about 1.2 million individuals in the US. This is considering those who are coming from Haiti, but then also their children, right? The population of Haitian individuals in the US is really sizable in these large urban areas that I mentioned, so Boston, New York, South Florida. And then another thing to consider is how these waves might mark different socioeconomic status, classes of Haitians as well. So in the 1920s, that wave that I mentioned was really marked by upper class Haitians coming to the US. A lot of them were actually going to the Northeast, so to New York and to Boston. And then in contrast, you have a lot of lower class Haitians of the 70s and 80s wave who are primarily settling in South Florida, more specifically in Miami. This is also something that a lot of people don't really realize or think about. So even for me, I remember going up to New York. I have family up in New York too. Even recently in the last couple of years, and just the discourses that exist between like, oh, are you a New York Haitian or are you a Florida Haitian? And then there's a lot of microaggressions that actually come with that, right? Like being seen as a Florida Haitian as being seen as like less than, right? And that comes from this history where a lot of lower class Haitians were actually settling in South Florida. So again, lots to think about when you are looking at this from a lens of totality of culture. Following the 2010 earthquake, the influx of Haitian students was found primarily in these areas, and then, like I said, most notably in South Florida. So this just shows you a little bit more of that, of these areas that are really highly populated with Haitian immigrants. So you see those first three, but even Orlando, Philly, Atlanta, the Naples area, as I mentioned, I was born over there. Stamford is the first place that my dad moved to actually when he came to the US. So again, you typically, if someone says that they're Haitian in the US, you could probably pinpoint where one of these areas is probably where they live. A lot of times individuals will move into ethnic enclaves to be with those of a similar culture. And then just some more. I show all of this because sometimes it's really interesting. I encounter a lot of people in Miami who grew up here and who have lived here their whole lives, and they're like, "Oh, there's Haitians in Miami," and I'm like, "Well, what?" So I think sometimes we tend to like live in our bubbles even of like where we are. Miami is so vast. But I just show this to show that you actually see that after English and Spanish, the next language that is most spoken in Florida is actually Haitian Creole, also in Delaware too. But just again, just to kind of know how prevalent we are here and why it's so important as students in Florida to understand this culture and understand this history. So let me kind of shift a little bit to Haitians in Miami. So for many years, Haitians have been migrating to the Miami area, right? And they've really just become an integral part of the South Florida community. Haitian immigrants entered South Florida, though, as considered to be like unwanted immigrants. So poverty, as I mentioned, right? If you think of that SES where that they were coming with, their poverty kept them really segregated. You see that now. So if you think like if I know someone who's Haitian, you can probably pinpoint like either two or three areas in Miami that they live predominantly in the North Miami area and that Northeast corridor, but then also you'll have some in South Dade, like closer to Homestead, and then some in the Kendall area. And again, those are often marked by different classes as well. But the predominant group, right? Poverty kept them segregated, particularly in the north part of Miami. And really being called Haitian was a huge like racial slur growing up in Miami. So if you talk to individuals who grew up in Miami in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s even, I would say that the late 2000s is where we kind of saw this shift where there was a lot of pride, but Haitian youth would really not say that they were Haitian. It was considered to be a huge slur at the time. If you were called Haitian, it was a huge insult. So you'll see a lot of parents who are people who are now parents of kids who sometimes you would think, are they just not proud of their Haitian culture? But it's because, again, they grew up during a time where being Haitian was seen as very derogatory. Nonetheless, you see these Haitian individuals, right? They're members of this ethno-linguistic group that's isolated a little bit, right? Like their predominant language is English nor Spanish, and in the context of Miami. So not only are they segregated geographically, but also with these other cultural factors like language. So you'll see a lot of that's my dissertation, as I mentioned, was focused on ethno-racial identity development, especially in the context of this. You want to think about when working with Haitian youth, especially their identity making process, right? How they might differentiate themselves from other individuals or not from a cultural standpoint. And even in the presence of other Afro-Caribbeans. Haitian students kind of, again, they shape this unique and distinct identity united by their language, by Haiti-specific cultural aspects. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those cultural aspects. But also it's important just to not homogenize, right? Like not every single Black individual has the same experience, particularly if you're thinking about the Afro-Caribbeans, even within that subculture, there's also cultures within that too. So again, always wanting to think about things not as a monolith. Um, so here you see by the late 1980s, there's a huge presence of Haitians in the Edison Little River area, as I mentioned, right? This northern part, the name Little Haiti was actually coined as a result of large groups of Haitian refugees that settled in this particular enclave. I don't know if anyone's been to Little Haiti before. Actually, at the end of the presentation, I'll give a few recs of things that you might be able to do there. But this is that area that you can see here in this map, which is really interesting too. I was recently learning about more about the Liberty City area. So we are actually super housed. Little Haiti's housed right next to a very predominant African American. So I say that to signify the difference in African American community in Miami that has a very different cultural, experience as well. So as I mentioned, many Haitians in Miami now reside in other neighborhoods in the Northeast Corridor. So El Portal, Miami Shores, North Miami Beach. Actually, when I was at Mailman, I was working in schools in North Miami and North Miami Beach. So my whole experience as an intern, actually, I think I was probably working with like 90% Haitian individuals of some sort, given the rotations that I chose to be a part of. But you also see a rapid demographic transformation of a lot of these smaller neighborhoods that surround Little Haiti due to gentrification, which is a whole other topic I could also talk about in terms of how that impacts a cultural community. But what we saw again over time is that those who had financial means eventually moved to South Dade County. So again, really important to know. I'll give you some examples just from my current practice, right? So right now I have several Haitian patients who are from the more southern part of Dade, so even like Kendall. And then I'm thinking my internship year, I was working with a lot of Haitians in North Miami, and their experiences are vastly, vastly, vastly different in terms of how they identify the language that they speak. So a lot of my North Miami Haitians will predominantly speak Creole at home. A lot of my families in the southern part of Miami might predominantly speak French, and that is related to education status too. So again, all of these factors to consider, and those discourses that exist too. Like, are you a Little Haiti Haitian or a Kendall Haitian? That's actually a discourse within the Haitian community. So understanding even where in Miami your family comes from is really important to understanding how they live their experience here. So I want to kind of shift gears into some clinical research, assessment, all of the things, right? All of these kinds of considerations to think about. And I say considerations because again, you want to take all of this and see them as that. Like these are not, this is going to apply to every single person, but just things to consider. So when you see L1, I'm talking about someone's native language. L2 is a language that they acquired afterwards. So oftentimes when we see, not only with Haitian youth, but just immigrant youth in general who speak another language other than English primarily, you often see that they'll transfer rules of grammar and syntax between their languages, and they'll have different strengths and weaknesses across modes. A lot of Haitian parents actually, depending on their education, there's actually a high illiteracy rate of Haitian adults. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but you might see that obviously speaking wise, they're like perfect when it comes to speaking in Creole, but maybe in their reading, you might see that kind of lower. So just to give you some examples, there's a lot here, but I'll just kind of point out a few and why these might be important. I do testing, so I always think about how we're assessing individuals, whether it's in the context of the classroom or the context of just testing and assessment. But here are some examples. So in Haitian Creole, the pronouns he, she, it, they are all with one word. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of individuals. My parents, they've lived here since the 80s and they still do this. Like instead of if they're talking about someone who identifies as she, they still might say he, just because it's hard for them to kind of differentiate that. And then there's a lot of words that are taken in context too, right? So if I wanted to say he read it, like he read the book, like he read it, that sentence in Creole is li. So like it's literally the same word 3 times, but you have to say it in context to understand what you're talking about. So these are just kind of little things that might come to mind if you're kind of assessing a Haitian individual. Other things to think about is that oftentimes articles are omitted in Creole. So I am going to store instead of I am going to the store, right? We don't want to just say, oh, like they're not speaking properly. We want to think that there's a context to their language and how that might transfer. Also with tenses too. So verbs themselves don't change for different tenses. So they danced yesterday. Oftentimes, like you might notice that a Haitian individual might omit making their words into tenses because in Creole, we don't do that. So we just add a word instead of changing the actual verb. Some other things, right? So this is a big one. There's no R sound at the ends of words in Haitian Creole. And honestly, a lot of times you'll notice that there's a difficulty with saying that R and then also with TH. The voice TH also doesn't exist in Haitian Creole. So instead of saying then, you'll hear a lot of individuals say den, right? So again, this is important because if I'm testing someone or if I'm just talking to someone and I'm like, I noticed that there's this articulation issue, right? You want to think about that from a cultural lens. Well, in Creole, the TH voiced doesn't exist. So is it a true articulation issue? Is it more a cultural issue that is coming up? Really important things to think about. There's a lot here, but just want to give you some examples of that. Other things just to consider from a communication perspective with Greek. So informally, a lot of times, the more that trust is developed, a lot of times Haitians are really used to embracing giving a kiss as a sign of affection and acceptance after establishing trust. And I think this is not just isolated to the Haitian community. I was just greeted with a kiss by one of my patient's moms earlier today, actually, right? So I think that's something to consider in terms of how nonverbal communication is expressed. And even as an identifier, oh, okay, well, maybe there's more trust established here over time. Oftentimes, Haitian individuals might tend to agree, even when they disagree, to avoid conflict with a person of perceived higher authority. I was actually consulting with someone recently who was telling me, I think this Haitian professional, I think he's just super like anxious. And after talking to him, I was like, no, he's not anxious. He just is used to perceiving higher authority with so much respect. And Haiti, you're taught like, even for a teacher, do not look them in the eyes, do not ever raise your voice, do not ever, disagree with them. They could say something that you really see as wrong, but they are always right. So authorities are always seen as kind of right. And I think that's an important implication as a psychologist because I don't want just to say something and 9 times out of 10, a Haitian individual might not question it. So I want to make sure that they're really leaving with a good understanding of what I'm even talking about, right? Super, super important. So even when I'm working with Haitian families, I tend to ask them, right? The same way we might with a child or a youth that we're working with, like, so can you just repeat back to me like what I said? I'll ask them like, what did you understand of what I said? Do you have questions about it? It's okay. I literally had an intake this past week with a Haitian family who was super, super hesitant to bring in their child who was exhibiting a lot of symptoms related to ADHD. And I could tell that they were just really hesitant about being there. So I took a step back and I was like, okay, let's just talk about where you're coming from, right? Because I recognize like I'm gonna say, hey, like, I'm gonna put this label and you're probably going to just say okay, but you're probably gonna feel not so great about it. So let's talk about that, right? These are really important things to consider. Um, and then even like education and research materials, this is something that came to my mind and I'll share again, cultural humility, right? Like things that I learned even in the last few years, or things that maybe I knew, but I didn't think about. A lot of times they should be visual or oral if possible, given that illiteracy rate. So a lot of Haitian parents were not educated in reading, even of the Creole language. So I'll talk about how that manifested. A couple years ago, I was part of working on a grant, working with a large Haitian population here in Miami, and I was tasked with all things Haitian Creole. So I was, making translating consents, all of our documents into Creole. And I was like, all right, this is great. Like I'm being so culturally competent. I'm adding all of these things in Creole so that our participants can really understand what's going on. And I was a part of kind of distributing these consent forms. I have a Haitian man, older Haitian man, come up to me. I'm letting him know about the study we're doing. And I said, yeah, we have these consent forms. You can read more in Creole. And he takes a look at it and he was like, do you have one in English? And I thought, what? Like, why would you want one in English? But it's because he never learned to read in Creole. He could speak to Creole. We were speaking in Creole that whole time. And he still asked for one in English because having lived in America for a shorter time than he was in Haiti, but still for a good amount of time. He felt even more comfortable reading in English, even though it wasn't that great, than reading in Creole, right? Something I hadn't even thought about. I'm like, we have all of these documents that so many of our families won't even be able to read. So I changed my approach. I sat with him and I just read him what was on that consent form. It's something to think about from a research perspective, especially, right? Like, how are we making sure that the individuals with whom we're working are really understanding what's going on, and also just being able to meet them where they're at. I'm like, yeah, this took a lot of time for me to sit here and read this entire consent form, but it's so important because had he taken the English one, he probably, he might not have understood either, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing this chat, right? Related to timing allotted. Super important. Um, and then again, what can be perceived by that? So another example I have from, I'm kind of jumping to just trust in general. But oftentimes, again, taking everything in context, I talked about how there's been so much corruption, instability in the country. So you have so much of this mindset of a Haitian is like, I am not trusting until I'm proven that I can trust you. Until you prove that I can trust you, I'm not going to trust you. So trust is a huge aspect when we're thinking about rapport building with the Haitian community. And um, one thing that I think is really important, especially just working with immigrant populations in general, is where they might be coming from with signing forms. When I was doing my dissertation, I kind of went back and forth with my chair, but I fought really hard. I was like, listen, in this IRB, like, I'm gonna request to waive a signature on our consent forms because I just don't think it's gonna happen. Like, just knowing my parents, they like did not like signing anything growing up. And other, Haitian individuals that I've worked with, and I was able to get that approved. I was really excited. In fact, I had a parent who before I even was talking to them about the study, they said, "Do I have to sign anything?" Because oftentimes they think, okay, if I sign something, what am I signing to? Do I even understand what's going on? Where is my signature being taken? Is this going to have a negative implication for me or for my family, right? All these things where it's super important to just think about, I was able to have them consent to this study that I did without them ever having to sign something, and that was approved for. So just things to consider. Something that I wouldn't have thought about, I don't think, until I was in the situation doing research with Haitian individuals, but those are things to really keep in mind when it comes to trust and even communicating. Yeah, exactly. That barrier for clinical support can be huge, right? When trust is really important, building rapport is key. So knowing these things and maybe just keeping them in the back of your head is good to have. And just beyond language, right? So of all factors that affect an individual's behavior or performance on any task, none is more likely to exceed those of culture. We're so socialized by everything, and culture is really broad, right? Sometimes when we hear culture, we think like race, ethnicity, but there's also religion, there's language, there's nationality, there's where you grew up, there's your parents' socialization that then was your primary socialization. So acculturation is one of the most influential factors operating within the context of any kind of evaluative experience. We're always thinking about how individuals are navigating the sense of biculturalism, existing in a place that might feel foreign but also familiar at the same time, right? Um, so again, that process of acquiring cultural knowledge, the example that I was giving is eye contact. So if I'm completing an evaluation with a Haitian individual, maybe who's from Haiti, who was educated in Haiti, and I'm like writing down, okay, no eye contact. Let me think about that from a cultural lens. Maybe they're not making eye contact for a different reason. You have to be super just mindful of these things, right? And it feels like, oh my gosh, like how will I ever consider all of this? And it takes time. That's the cultural humility. I just showed with you even that like I grew up in a Haitian household and I'm still like thinking about these things and constantly changing my approach and working with Haitian individuals. So also considering religion and spirituality, super important in the Haitian community. So historically, the majority of Haitians kind of grew up in Catholic households over time. Many are practicing Protestant religions as well. But I would say nonetheless, a lot of Haitians, at least from the parent perspective, that's why I kind of noted generational differences, because Haitians, in America, I think their experience is different. But those from Haiti, like you were worshiping something, kind of growing up in Haiti. So a lot of times many will call upon help from priests or pastors. And will not even think about calling a psychologist, right? Because their mind is focused on, well, this is the person that I can trust who can help me. I'll get to this in a little bit, but oftentimes mental health concerns are related to a spiritual sense, like something that is going on spiritually. So they oftentimes, and they're trusted, right? Priests, pastors, they'll call on them for help. Something to keep in mind, even if you're working with a Haitian individual, and we are doing a lot of our research. A couple years ago with that grant I was talking about, we tried to collaborate with local churches, right? Because that's where the community already has trust. Um, Individuals may simultaneously practice Haitian voodoo while maintaining Christian beliefs. Again, could do a whole presentation on this too. Um, but oftentimes spirits from the voodoo religion are called upon for help in times of distress, which you can see as possession. All of this can then lead to other factors. So I'll give you an example. I had a student a couple years ago in one of my schools in North Miami, and she was transferred to me by another clinician, actually for cultural reasons. They thought that it would be a better match. So I started working with her. And she told me how in the last year, there were at least 3 times where her dad like brought her back to Haiti because, she was like, I'm working on this stuff and I feel super depressed and I'm really anxious. And my dad was like, you need to go get rid of whatever spirit is in you because that's what's causing this, right? So they actually went back to Haiti several times to try to get an exorcist involved, um, from a spiritual sense, because she was experiencing these mental health concerns, right? So something to always keep in mind is you want to ask, right? Like, what is their relation to religion and to spirituality? Because a lot of times that will have an impact on what we choose to do, and how we choose to inform what's going on from a cultural standpoint, right? But again, I mentioned general generational differences. I will say that the majority of the parents that I work with will oftentimes speak from a religious or a spiritual standpoint. And a lot of times the kids it goes here and there. Like sometimes they're super in agreement with their parents. Other times they're like, I don't know what my parents are talking about. Like, I don't believe in that, right? So again, you want to not only just think, okay, this family believes in this, but what does the kid think in relation to their parent, right? Other mental health considerations, right? Just a huge stigma generally for mental health. Even, it's interesting too, and you see that trickle down. History is so important. Whenever I'm like looking for other Haitian licensed psychologists in Miami, I like think there's like 1 or 2 that come up. I'm like one of them. So like you think about, like, even for me, I remember telling my parents that I wanted to study psychology. And firstly, they're like, what is that? And second of all, they were like, don't do that, do something else. Because for them, like, it's just not a construct that is super prevalent from their experience, from their culture. Like, there's a huge stigma around mental health, and oftentimes it's related, as I mentioned, to something more supernatural. Like if something's going on, it's like there's something inside of you. We need to pray. We need to, which is all important from a cultural standpoint to consider that, but you want to kind of consider it in context, right? But even then, a lot of times individuals who have mental health concerns are kind of victims of shame. So they're considered in Creole to be fou, which means crazy in Creole. So it's like this huge negative connotation, right? Which then has a lot of implications. So for treatment seeking behaviors, right? It's really hard for me to kind of be in my context and think, man, there's probably so many Haitians that could benefit from services, especially with a Haitian clinician who literally will just never even think to go to one, right? So a lot of this is also just informing like why our field is so important and can be helpful. But also for diagnoses, right? I'm always really, really mindful. Like I will let a family know, listen, for insurance purposes, I'm putting, this diagnosis here. This is what it means. If you have questions about it, let me know. This is not to box your child in any way. It's just to help them, right? And really just approaching things from that lens, but also from just how we label things too. A lot of these constructs just don't exist even in the Creole language or in the Haitian mind frame. So if I'm saying, a child is depressed, and instead of saying the word for depression in Creole, which a lot of people will be like, I don't even know what you're talking about, I'll just explain it. So your child is experiencing a lot of sadness and low mood. It feels like they're, like, and I'll kind of be a lot more verbal, hyper verbal in explaining, because they might not understand if I just say your kid's depressed. They're going to be like, okay, like, what does that mean? Um, there's other kind of the constructs for mental health in the Haitian culture are oftentimes really related to like the heart and the head. So um individuals will say like, oh, they have maladie que, which means like a sickness of the heart. And that's usually how they would represent things like emotional disorders, mood, anxiety related disorders. It's the problem of the heart. Or maladie tête, like a problem of the head. So any psychotic concerns, poor concentration, even unusual behaviors that they're noticing, they see it as like this is a sickness of the head. So again, important for us to think about in terms of how we explain what it is that we're even doing with a family. Some other just considerations to think about. So a lot of times, as I mentioned, many Haitians don't seek therapy. Therapy is not widely available, affordable, or even valued in Haiti. So um, even from I always think of things from a systems level. Like I do think that there's so much more education that needs to be had in areas and in communities where there's such a stigma, because I think access can be so improved, and just the understanding of what it is that we even do as psychologists. Again, that initial step for a clinician working with Haitians has to be that willingness to educate the client on the process of therapy. And sometimes that does take some time, right? We just have to think about allotting more time to some of these things initially. And building trust is really, really, really key. Sometimes you'll notice that a family might just not be super wanting to engage. I've had so many difficulties, right? Even as a Haitian individual who can speak their language, just trying to get parents to engage. I remember I was working with a group and we were giving parenting workshops in the community, and I'm like, it's so hard just to engage Haitian parents because they're constantly going to question, what is this for? What do you need this for? I hear the word research and I like don't like that. So what is that about, right? Like there's all of these things that you always want to think about, and having to allot that time and trust. Just some resources that exist in the community. So Saint-La Haitian Neighborhood Center is a great community resource. They provide workshops, scholarships, employment services, financial literacy, tech literacy, health insurance enrollment, immigration support. So a lot of times if I have families who are coming here from Haiti, or they've migrated across other countries, but from Haiti, I'll kind of give them a lot of resources about Saint-La, because they have, as you can see, so many other kinds of resources to help them. I also, when I was an intern at Mailman, I worked with the pediatric mobile clinic. We provide services to uninsured families. So this occurs through the Center for Haitian Studies on a couple days a week. So the mobile clinic is a great resource. They have health fairs, family medicine, and also health education. And just some things for you. I always think, the last time I gave a talk like this, one of the questions was, okay, well, what are ways that I can learn more and just experience more of the Haitian culture in Miami, right? Because a lot of people live here and they have no idea that it exists so widely here. So just some things for you all to think about engaging in. So the Little Haiti Cultural Complex, it's this amazing center actually in the heart of Little Haiti. They have a Sounds of Little Haiti every third Friday. So this is like a huge outdoor concert that exists that's super, super fun. I actually went the last couple of times and it's been really fun. I've been going ever since I was like in college. So they have an art gallery there, a Caribbean marketplace that always has really cool initiatives. Actually, one of the current initiatives happening there on Saturdays, they're offering cooking classes for Haitian meals, but from a nutritionist, because I could talk about so many things with the Haitian culture, but there's a lot of just concerns with the diet that is so many individuals are used to, then leads to a lot of other health concerns. They're teaching about how do you cook your most loved Haitian meals, but in a more healthy way. They also have dance classes there too, which is fun. Some restaurants, yes, I love Chef Creole as well. Such a good one. They actually have a lot of locations, and they're so good. Naomi's Garden, you can go and either like sit there or pick it up to go. There's another one really close to the Little Haiti Cultural Complex called Piment Bouc, which is super, super good as well. And I highly recommend. Honestly, if you just type in Haitian restaurant in Miami, you'll probably love your experience just in terms of the food. It's so good. So There was so much information there I recognize, and I was trying to get through all of it. I'm happy just to take any questions. I saw that there were some things in the chat, so I'll also just take a look at those now. Um, awesome. I'm glad that this was really helpful and insightful. Yeah, and I engage with some of these too. So yeah, super just a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, wonderings?
Yeah, I actually had a question about, well, if you do like school consultations with Haitian families, and then also when it comes to, I guess, like some of the speech and language concerns or like differences that we were talking about, they may like come up as concerns in schools. So how you might deal with that as far as like, does the family want speech therapy? Do they not want speech therapy? Like th those types of things.
Yeah, so a lot of times I don't have as many Haitian families currently through the hospital as I was mentioning, just from I think an access standpoint. But the ones that I do have, I oftentimes will consult with the schools. Typically the ones that I'm seeing currently, it's less for cultural considerations. But when I was working more in the heart of North Miami and with a large Haitian population there, I was constantly, constantly just talking to teachers. It's really interesting too, though, with a lot of the schools in that area, a lot of the teachers are Haitian, so I think they have some of this understanding as well. But with those who aren't, I found that a lot of times it was more so consulting about things that they can do just from a classroom level. Again, I like to think very systems based in that sense, but just from a classroom level. And also the biggest topic that I would kind of consult with teachers and schools about was just trying to reach parents. So a lot of the things that I was sharing with you all, I would share with them too, in terms of, what is their approach? Are they kind of operating from, hey, I need this signature, I need this thing for research, I need this thing done, rather than trying to build a trust first. So a lot of times those are the things that would kind of just come up. In terms of kind of referring for other services, it's very similar. I recently did an evaluation in the last year with someone here at the hospital who was super hesitant to even get an evaluation. And then in the recommendations, I put all of these things, right? Speech, OT, all of this, and they were just like, So I ended up kind of acting like a patient navigator too, if you will, in my role. Sometimes you kind of just have to wear multiple hats in order to help the family. And I was one just trying to explain to them like why this would be important. Um, and from there, I offered to be able to kind of consult with whatever therapist they were working with, which I never heard back from them. But I do always offer that just because I do think it is important to keep that in mind. So I don't know if I answered your questions. Yeah,
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
you're welcome. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
Um, Thank you for your talk. This was really helpful and interesting. I had a family recently who is really interested in services,
Mhm.
has done therapy in the past, will be pursuing more, but has never talked to their community about their child's problems because they are concerned about how he will be perceived by
Mhm.
others in the community. But mom really believes in therapy and is super excited about it. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on like how to help families who are maybe dealing with that kind of difference between their own beliefs and at least their perception of how others in the community might respond?
For sure. I mean, I think there's a few ways to think about it. If they sometimes like they prefer to just keep it more private, and that's okay. But if they do have this desire to kind of share with their community and just maybe even feel more of a sense of like belonging with individuals, they don't want to be so secretive. I oftentimes will just think about it from the perspective of what I was sharing at the end of the near the end of the presentation, right? Instead of having these labels that can seem really harsh, right? Like, oh, like I don't know what they're experiencing, but my child has like ADHD, for example, rather than just saying, rather they could approach it by saying, yeah, like my kid is having difficulties, like they can't pay attention in school and it's really like impacting their school performance, and leave it at that, right? A lot of times, even with my families that I work with, I'll leave it at that because there's really no need to kind of go further into it and then go into that fear of like, maybe what I'm saying might create a stigma even more for this family, right? It's the same thing from the community context. I would just encourage, like, if they do want to share, thinking about sharing like what is the concern that they're actually experiencing, because 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, there's someone else in the community whose kid is also, for example, sad, or having difficulty concentrating in school, and approaching it from that, I think is always helpful. In terms of just their own support, like I said, the resources that exist in the community, like Slintla is a great one, because oftentimes you'll have other families who might really be supportive of like mental health services, or just engaging with the community more, will kind of go through there. So if they are seeking some extra support in that sense with other Haitian individuals, I would recommend that center as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you enough how grateful I am for your presentation. Thank you. And thank you
Thank
all
you.
for putting, this collab together. I'm curious if there's any specific cultural considerations as it relates to maybe like the clinical conceptualization between something like early childhood developmental trauma versus like more like ADHD, maybe more like developmental concerns broadly, like autism, things like that. And so I'm really, given how much cultural aspects play into that, I'm curious about that while also knowing like the low rates of like kind of accessibility and like the low rates of service utilization and just like inequities. So just anything you could share. I know that's like a huge question, but
Yeah.
anything you share
Yeah.
is so good. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot to think about conceptualizing in the context of all of this, right? I do think that I always start by asking about their history, like, how did you get here? Are you, an immigrant family? Were you here and you had some family trauma in a different way, if anything, right? So I always start from a place of just assuming that there was something going on, and that's with all of my families, right? Like, I never want to kind of neglect that, because that's so important. It's so important to conceptualization, especially as I was mentioning before, right? Like, I had one kiddo, he was so he just came off as so shy, so didn't really talk much. And for me, right, and learning more about this family, I was like, okay, I can conceptualize this from like, he's just a shy kid, doesn't like to talk, or I can conceptualize this from how much I've gotten to know him, right? Like, he is here and is learning a new language. He watched several family members die on his way to America. He is also in a context where he's feeling really sad and doesn't know like what to do with that, because his family doesn't really understand that. There's also like, he comes from a culture that values so much respect. So shyness is often, you're seen as shy, but really you're just being respectful, right? So I think a lot of times for me, like, I just don't like to jump to conclusions. Like, I really take a lot of time, like so much time, just getting to know a family and their history. I know you asked kind of a big question, but starting from that intention, I think, is always really important, because then you'll find that conceptualization just feels like it makes more sense over time. Like, if you really know a family, you can be more confident in saying like, yeah, like, I don't think this is autism. I think that it's this instead. So I encourage you all to take that extra time. I know it's hard, but it is important to do that. So I appreciate the question, and constantly thinking about things from that lens too. Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, I do believe we are out of time. Thank you so, so much for your thoughtfulness and sharing your insights and expertise. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here. I do need to say just very quickly that today's professional development seminar was sponsored by APA Division 53, which is the Society for Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology. And this is part of their Child Mental Health in Action grant. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for Dr. Gobin. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, again. Bye.